Hi, I'm Lainey Corda. I've been teaching 6th grade ELA, Social Studies, and ELD in SFUSD for the past 11 years. The following is a triangulated analysis of Lucy Calkins' units of study for reading, the Grade 6 narrative unit, as well as a critique of the supplementary materials I've included over the past year. The rationale for analyzing not just the Calkins curriculum, but also my own supplementary materials is that I felt it was a necessary step in order to truly give myself the opportunity to reflect on what I actually did in my own classroom. In this analysis, I will note when I'm looking at the Calkins curriculum and when I'm looking at my own. What does a Lucy Calkins lesson look like? For the Lucy Calkins lessons, there's usually for each day, there's one lesson and one skill. The teacher generally reads a suggested text aloud. The students will then pair share with a specific question in mind. The teacher will circulate and give feedback. After this point, the teacher will do a think aloud, modeling the skill, and then writing down jot notes in a designated reader's notebook. The jot notes are there to track the teacher's thinking and show students the process of the modeled skill. After this point, students are let go to a workshop where they will read books independently, books that they've chosen. There is an option for the teacher to hold individual and small group reading conferences during this time. Students are expected to practice the skill that was modeled in their reader's notebooks. The teacher circulates and gives intentional feedback, at times counting on the fact that other students will overhear that feedback and hopefully imitate the desired behavior. Students are expected to read independently at home for homework and choose one of the skills to practice. The next day, before the next lesson begins, students discuss what they've read and share their thoughts before starting the day's lesson. In terms of my supplementary curriculum, I include a lot of different things that are not included in the Calkins curriculum. For example, we use different class novels as a read aloud text. Sometimes instead of having students choose their own independent books to read, we'll read together from the class novel that we're focusing on. I also do running records, small group and/or individual targeted instruction during the reading workshop. This is not something that's necessarily suggested within the Calkins curriculum, but it's something that I choose to do because of what my students need. Before the read alouds, I have my students share connections and activate prior knowledge related to what we're going to read about that day. That is not something that is consistent within the narrative unit in the 6th grade Lucy Calkins curriculum, but it's something that I choose to do on a daily basis. My students are given word banks, sentence frames, and sentence starters. They are taught skills for literature circles, which are regularly conducted throughout the unit. They follow along with reading guide cards when we are reading the class novels together. Again, the text is read aloud to them, and the rationale for that will come up later. For the triangulated analysis, we will be looking at the theories that support the curricula, best practices and mispractices, the cultural responsiveness of this curriculum, and I will conclude with the major takeaways I had after completing this assignment. All right, there are a lot of theories, so get ready. The first theory that we're looking at is the unfoldment theory. The premise of the Lucy Calkins Readers Workshop is that students are choosing their own books and students are reading their own books. Her rationale is that when students are reading books they have no interest in, it's almost a waste of their time. If you have 30 kids in a classroom and 10 of them hate the book you're reading, that's 10 kids who are wasting 20 to 40 minutes a day fake reading with you. This is in direct alignment with Rousseau's unfoldment theory. He postulates that students will learn less if they're forced into the content, a sentiment shared by Calkins and evident in the curriculum that is driven by students choosing their own books. Calkins also draws heavily from Bandura's social cognitive theory. In her teacher materials, she regularly suggests that teachers make their feedback loud enough so that the students around the targeted student will hear it and respond. For example, while students are instructed to discuss a character's traits in the first part of a lesson, the teacher is instructed to walk around and prod students loudly, asking them to push each other's thinking or saying things like, "Wow, I really like how you used evidence for that," or "Can you ask your partner why they think that?" in order to encourage other students to do the same. In almost every lesson, before we begin reading or during reading, I ask students to make connections to an idea we will be reading about in the text and share with each other. This is directly related to schema theory. Schema theory includes the processes through which existing knowledge structures are modified to incorporate new information and the way in which schemata change across a period in time. So basically, by activating prior knowledge that's connected to the day's reading, I'm drawing on the experience that's already in the room. Students are then able to make more connections as they hear each other's experiences. This also helps students to later discuss parts of the text that they had already connected to prior in the lesson. Another theory that is evident in the Calkins and combined curriculum for myself is social constructivism. The premise of Vygotsky's work is the belief that children learn as a result of their social interactions with others. Tracy and Morrow, 2012. The zone of proximal development refers to the ideal level of task difficulty to facilitate learning, which, according to Vygotsky, is the level at which a child can be successful with appropriate support. In both of these aspects, literature circles definitely show social constructivism. Literature circles are a hallmark of social constructivism. Students are asking questions, generating ideas, and co-constructing knowledge about text, which is exactly what Vygotsky suggested to support learning. A key idea in social constructivism is Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. It is very evident in the supplementary curriculum I provide to students. Students are consistently given word banks and sentence frames in order to help them interact with each other about the text. For example, with specific feelings and provided sentence structures to help them discuss how they felt and what happens with their sibling when reading a text about family dynamics. Most of my students are ELs and they need the extra scaffolding. A lot of my kids have IEPs. Many of them need those sentence frames and starters to formulate a complete sentence. So this is using Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. When we move to literature circle activities, students use word banks with specific traits to describe the people involved in a certain part of the text and explain why they described them in this manner. Calkins routinely asks students to write down their best thoughts or their most interesting thoughts. Thinking about thinking is, as we know, literally the definition of metacognition. Where it gets a little fuzzy with this curriculum is supporting students in exactly what to write down or how to come up with those thoughts. I'll discuss this more at the end of the presentation. Another place metacognitive theory shows up is in my work with students during reading workshop. This is not a suggestion from Calkins. It is what I thought my students needed in order to improve their reading comprehension. During workshop, when I can, I run targeted instruction with a small group of students or one-on-one. Many of the skills I'm working on with students involve identifying what they've understood and what they didn't understand. Then we work on fix-up strategies to help solve those problems. In doing this, students are practicing monitoring their own comprehension. From Tracy and Morrow, metacognitive theory indicates that poor readers' comprehension can be enhanced through direct and explicit instruction of metacognitive skills. This is exactly what I'm looking at, comprehension. There are pros and cons to this. The obvious con is that it's extremely hard to manage with all the different levels and books in the room. It's not a foolproof way to know whether or not a student is utilizing a taught strategy unless I'm currently reading with that student. It doesn't guarantee engagement, and students don't always choose a book that will help them grow. Sometimes they choose books that are way too hard and they don't understand them at all, and sometimes they're way too easy and they're just flipping through. It definitely has a lot of choice and gives agency to the reader, and it gives my students time to read things they enjoy. It gives me a lot of information about my students because we get that one-on-one check-in time, but it is a ton of management. 12-year-olds don't just stay on task because we ask them to. Just something to be aware of when thinking about metacognitive theory and the Calkins curriculum. Okay, there are also a lot of best practices to consider. So I'm going to start with some of the strategies that I found when reading the book from Morrow and Gamble. The strategies I kept seeing over and over again were relatively the same: self-monitoring of comprehension, visualizing, identifying important parts of the plot, asking questions, making predictions, basically what you would do in literature circles. Some of the best practices that students have consistently in my classroom are discussing what they understood and what they didn't, discussing connections they made, posing questions they had, sharing thoughts about the text. They are participating in literature circles, which include many of these mentioned strategies. However, these skills, even though they are not taught in isolation, are still seen and presented as tools in a toolbox, which is not recommended. According to the text, this is a mispractice. The students have not been specifically instructed with this curriculum, mine or Ms. Calkins, to think about or discuss which strategy they used and why, or how effective it was in aiding their comprehension of their self-selected book. Even some of the suggested conversations that are within the Calkins curriculum don't generally lead students to talking about this. So I would consider this a mispractice in both my curriculum and of the Calkins curriculum. Another mispractice is that students are getting a ton of skills and strategies and isolated practice, but the curriculum doesn't specifically provide guidance with how to get students to be strategic, to think about the conditions under which they are using those particular strategies. The strategies are not internalized, so it falls short here. Cultural responsiveness is about communication. What are students discussing and how is it being discussed? What information are the students learning and co-constructing, and how are they expected to show what they know? Why are they expected to show what they know in that particular way? Cultural responsiveness involves seeing different cultures through an asset-based, not a deficit-based lens, and provoking students to critically question the status quo. It challenges and provides opportunities for students to do something with the information they've co-constructed. In order for a curriculum to truly qualify as culturally responsive, it needs to explicitly guide teachers to facilitate this learning and these experiences. It needs to explicitly guide teachers in terms of content curation and assessment formulation. So sorry, I know I didn't transition to this, but at this point we'll look at how culturally responsive this curriculum is. In filling out the scorecard, I looked at representation and got a score of 11, which was emerging. I scored the combined curriculum utilizing Calkins suggested texts as well as my own supplementary materials as an 11. This was surprising to me. I thought my characters and authors were very diverse. 3 out of 4 novels we read in class are written by authors of color. However, I fell into the same issue that the CRE briefing mentioned. While I have a focus on Black and Latinx authors and characters, the curriculum is lacking in broad representation of diverse characters. None of the characters and authors were non-binary or differently abled. None of the authors I read as a whole class novel are of Native American or API descent. The family structures represented in the novels and stories we read together as a class are either two-parent or single-parent households. No same-sex parents are represented. My classroom library is an entirely different story, but my entire library is not curriculum that all of my students have access to, so I did not include it in the scorecard. I'd like to do a CRE for my entire library and make sure it is culturally responsive. The next piece was for social justice orientation, and I got a score of 4, emerging. I am disappointed that this curriculum is so heteronormative. The Calkins 6th grade Readers Workshop curriculum specifically anchors around a text that is definitely engaging, and my kids loved it, but the author is a white middle-class male. He doesn't talk much about race and class, which is kind of a case in point here. While students anecdotally and naturally have conversations regarding civil rights, the rights of farm workers, and U.S.-Iran relations during the course of our study, these are the topics that are in the novels we're reading. The curricula, Calkins and my own supplementary curriculum, do not directly encourage students to take actions to combat or promote equity within the school or local community. This is a huge area for growth within my curriculum. Students are ready to tackle these issues. They want to discuss them. Unfortunately, beyond class discussions, they simply aren't given a hands-on opportunity to combat these inequities from the context of my classroom, given my current curricular and instructional choices. This needs to change for next year. For the teacher's materials, that was pretty sad, -14, and this is actually culturally destructive. I am not at all surprised by this. None of the curriculum currently written into the Calkins units of study, at least for the narrative unit, is diverse. It makes allusions to Harry Potter and Taylor Swift, and I just don't know how much more wide you can get than that. The teachers for this materials for this particular unit definitely need work. And a glow area is that my school site is training me on being aware of my own biases. Regular opportunities to authentically engage families in our classroom experience do happen in my classroom. Their knowledge is fundamental to our curriculum. In terms of an area of growth, again, the teachers' materials that are in the Calkins curriculum, and even my curriculum that I'm creating, I am a white middle-class female, heterosexual. So in terms of who is creating content for my students, I need to branch out more myself a lot. So to conclude, there were definitely a lot of takeaways that I had after doing this assignment. If I were to take the Calkins narrative unit at face value and stick to the suggested lesson script and only utilize the suggested lesson resources, I would say the curriculum is culturally insufficient. The anchor text, First French Kiss, again was written by a white heterosexual male. He grows up in a home where he and his brother have their own rooms. Their family has its problems, but the style of storytelling as well as the cultural background is white. I have exactly 1 white student out of roughly 50 students this year. All of my other students are students of color. The curriculum as it stands does not scaffold very well for ELs or students with IEPs. It is up to the teacher to do the scaffolding and the differentiating. That being said, this is a very flexible curriculum. The strands and basic skills and strategies that students are taught to use and practice with can be taught using any text. There is agency and choice. Students can choose their independent reading books. Teachers can choose to do reading conferences and check-ins while students are... Sorry, I think I got cut off halfway through there. So I'm just going to start this part over again. So the main takeaways that I got, I think I actually left off on being flexible. So this curriculum is very flexible. And as I think I actually said before, that teachers can choose to do reading conferences. They can add different types of novels to do the read alouds with. There is a lot of flexibility within this curriculum. And completing the triangulated analysis has given me clarity as to why my district has not fully adopted this curriculum and why I constantly felt this particular curriculum was missing something. It definitely has its merits. My students are reading and talking about books more than they ever have, and their reading comprehension skills have absolutely increased as measured by several different assessments. The significant drawbacks are the overall lack of built-in cultural responsiveness as well as scaffolding for ELs and students with IEPs. As written, it does not directly address social justice issues. That all has to be supplemented by a teacher who is carefully curating their curriculum. This analysis has also been helpful to me to help me refine my skills as a curator of curriculum. In identifying the responsiveness of my supplementary curriculum, I've evaluated places where my curriculum shines and where it's lacking. This gave me a critical lens with which to view my curriculum and has helped me think about the necessary changes and alterations needed in the future. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at cordah@sfusd.edu. There is another study that Dr. Kessler linked to me about Lucy Calkins, and there was a whole analysis done by people that have been doing this for a lot longer than I've been, and I would be happy to send that to you if you would like it. Thank you so much, and I hope to see all of your presentations as well. Goodbye.